Hello, my dear masterminds. Let me tell you something you've probably sensed your entire life, but maybe never had the language to describe. Your presence never fit their expectations. Not because you weren't trying hard enough. Not because you were doing something wrong. Not because you needed to adjust or adapt or modify yourself. But because you weren't built that way. You were constructed differently. Designed with a different blueprint, assembled with different components for a different purpose, and no amount of trying was ever going to make you fit into spaces that weren't designed for your dimensions. They expected you to be a certain way, to move in predictable patterns, to respond with familiar reactions, to exist within boundaries they understood, to operate according to rules that made sense to them. And you tried. You genuinely did. You attempted to compress yourself into their containers, to adjust your nature to match their expectations. But it never quite worked. Because you can't force something into a space it wasn't designed to occupy. You can't make a frequency fit a bandwidth it doesn't belong to. You can't compress a consciousness into limitations it was built to move beyond. You weren't made for their boxes, weren't designed for their categories, weren't constructed for their comfort. And that's not a flaw. That's your foundation. Here's what most people never explain. The difficulty of not fitting isn't evidence something is wrong. It's evidence you're functioning exactly as designed. You probably noticed it early, maybe when you were younger, maybe later in life. But at some point, you became aware that you didn't quite fit, that something about you was different in ways others found confusing, in ways you couldn't easily explain, in ways that made belonging feel effortful rather than natural. They had expectations for how you should interact. What should interest you? What should excite you? What should matter to you? And you tried to match those expectations. Tried to be enthusiastic about things that left you cold. Tried to find meaning in activities that felt empty. Tried to connect with people whose wavelength didn't match yours. The gathering where everyone was laughing at jokes you didn't connect with. The career path everyone praised that felt constraining. The relationships everyone encouraged that left you feeling disconnected. You performed the expected responses, mirrored the appropriate reactions, played the role you thought you were meant to play. But it was draining, depleting, like constantly speaking a language that wasn't your native one, like wearing clothes that didn't fit right, but you kept adjusting, hoping they'd eventually feel comfortable. Like living in a space with ceilings too low and rooms too small for your actual dimensions. You could exist there, but you couldn't thrive there. You couldn't be fully yourself there. You couldn't expand into your actual size there. And the hardest part was questioning yourself, wondering if something was off, if you were somehow misaligned, if everyone else had received instructions you missed, because they all seemed to fit so naturally, seemed to understand the unspoken rules, seemed comfortable in spaces that felt constricting to you. What you didn't see then is this. They fit those spaces because they were built for them. Their construction matched those requirements. There was nothing wrong with them, and there was nothing wrong with you. You were simply built differently. Think of it like this. If you build a vehicle for water and a vehicle for land, neither is defective. They're just designed for different environments. The boat isn't flawed because it doesn't move well on highways. The car isn't faulty because it doesn't function in the ocean. They're each effective where they belong. The problem only appears when you force them into environments they weren't made for. You weren't built for their environment. Weren't designed for their expectations, weren't constructed for their comfort, and all those years you spent trying to fit, trying to adjust, trying to reshape yourself. You were essentially trying to be a boat on a highway, possible with extreme effort, but never natural, never comfortable, never sustainable, because you were working against your fundamental design. Your awareness was built with different parameters. Your energy operates at different frequencies. Your presence occupies different dimensions. Not better or worse than theirs, just different. Incompatible with their expectations, not because of defect, but because of design. You're not a failed version of what they expected. You're a successful version of something else entirely. Let's talk about how demanding it was when you were still trying to fit, when you were still attempting to match their expectations, when you were still believing that with enough effort, enough adjustment, enough suppression of your true nature, you could become what they wanted you to be. Here's the cost. Most people never measure. Every hour spent becoming what you're not is an hour taken away from becoming what you are. You reduced your intensity because it overwhelmed them. You softened your edges because they found you too sharp. You slowed your pace because you moved faster than their comfort allowed. You simplified your thoughts because your complexity confused them. You made yourself smaller in countless ways trying to fit their expectations, and each adjustment drained you. Because reshaping yourself into forms that aren't natural requires constant effort. Acting as something you're not exhausts you in ways being yourself never does. You were using all your energy on compression, on suppression, on adjustment. And there was little left for expansion, for expression, for becoming more of who you truly were. That performance came at a cost. Not just energetically, but internally. You were distancing yourself from your own nature, moving away from what felt true, and your inner signals kept urging you to stop, through fatigue, through dissatisfaction, through that persistent sense that something wasn't aligned, even when everything looked fine on the surface. They were genuinely puzzled by you, because you didn't fit their framework. You didn't match their categories. You didn't respond according to their expectations. And confusion often turned into critique, into judgment, into attempts to correct what they perceived as misalignment. They told you that you were too much or not enough, too intense or too distant, too fast or too slow. The details changed, but the message stayed the same. You weren't what they expected. You weren't what they wanted you to be. Some of them meant well. They truly believed they were helping you, believed they were guiding you toward better functioning. They didn't realize they were trying to adjust core design features. What they saw as problems were actually your natural traits. Here's the truth about people who try to correct you. They're not reacting to something wrong in you. They're reacting to what feels unfamiliar within themselves. Your difference challenges their perspective, and they want that discomfort resolved. Others were less considerate. They felt unsettled by your difference, uncomfortable with your refusal to conform, challenged by your inability to fit their expectations. So they applied pressure, tried to influence you, tried to make you question yourself until you reshaped into something they could understand and manage. But then something shifted. A moment arrived when you finally saw what was really happening, and that realization changed everything. When you stopped seeing yourself as flawed and started seeing yourself as different by design, when you understood that their expectations were the issue, not your inability to meet them, when you realized you weren't failing at being what they wanted, you were succeeding at being who you actually are. This understanding often arrived gradually, through experiences that didn't align with what you'd been taught, through people who saw you clearly and didn't ask you to change, through moments when you stopped trying to fit and felt more like yourself than ever before. Through the clear realization that you felt strongest, most authentic, most alive when you stopped conforming to expectations never meant for you. You began seeing yourself honestly, not through their lens, not through their assumptions, but through clarity that recognized your true structure, your real design, your actual purpose. And you recognized something important. You weren't built incorrectly. You were built differently. And different isn't defective. Different simply requires different environments, different contexts, different conditions to thrive. The job everyone praised that made you feel empty inside. You stepped away. The relationship everyone encouraged that felt restrictive. You ended it. The place everyone loved that limited you. You moved on. And each time you honored your real design instead of their expectations, you felt more aligned. This understanding brought release, permission to stop the exhausting effort of trying to be something you weren't, permission to exist in your authentic form instead of the compressed version you had maintained, permission to occupy your full dimensions instead of shrinking to fit their spaces. You weren't giving up. You were becoming aware of the truth of your structure, of the reality of your design. So if you weren't built for their expectations, what were you built for? What is your actual design meant to express? What environments were you shaped to grow in? Understanding this allows you to stop resisting your nature and start working with it. Here's what your different construction truly means. What they see as flaws are actually features. What they label as problems are often sources of strength. You were built for complexity they avoid, for depths they don't explore, for challenges they don't attempt. Your design includes capacity for intensity they can't sustain, for vision they don't perceive, for understanding they don't reach. You're not simpler than them. You're more layered, and layered designs require different conditions. More space, more honesty, more permission to exist fully. You were built for environments they find uncomfortable, for spaces that demand more than surface interaction, for contexts that require authenticity over performance. Your design thrives in truth, in depth, in real engagement. While their design thrives in comfort, in familiarity, in protected spaces, neither is wrong. But yours requires conditions that don't exist inside systems built around their expectations. You were built for transformation. They resist. For evolution, they avoid. For growth that requires leaving behind what feels familiar. Your construction includes capacity for continuous change, for expansion, for becoming. You were built to operate beyond boundaries they depend on, to move past limitations they accept, to exist outside categories they rely on. Your design doesn't fit their boxes because it was never meant to live inside them. When you finally accepted that you weren't built for their expectations, something settled inside you. A deep sense of ease, like releasing tension you'd carried for years, like setting down a weight you didn't realize you were holding. The ease of no longer resisting your own nature. Acceptance isn't giving up on growth. It's understanding the difference between growth that aligns with your design and adjustment that works against it. Growth expands who you are. Adjustment reduces it. You stopped apologizing for your intensity, stopped dimming your complexity, stopped slowing your pace, stopped reducing your dimensions. You allowed yourself to exist at full scale, full clarity, full truth. And it felt natural, like returning to yourself, like space opening, Where pressure once existed, your system relaxed, your energy returned, your inner state settled into what felt right. You began seeking environments that matched your design instead of trying to reshape yourself for places that didn't. You connected with people who recognized your structure instead of convincing those who misunderstood it. You pursued purposes that worked with your nature instead of against it. And things became lighter. Not because you were doing less, but because you were finally moving in alignment. And then you found them. The ones built similarly, operating at compatible frequencies, existing in dimensions you recognized instantly. They didn't need explanations. They understood. They didn't require you to justify your difference. They lived it too. They didn't ask you to make yourself smaller. They gave you room to be whole. This is what real belonging looks like. The right people never require the wrong version of you. With them, fitting wasn't effort, it was natural, unforced, like breathing, like returning to a familiar rhythm. You didn't need to perform, didn't need to adjust, didn't need to explain. You could simply exist, and that was sufficient. The right environments don't demand that you contradict your design. The right paths don't require you to resist your nature. When you're aligned with people, places, and purposes that match your design, things flow, they function, they make sense. Not because they're easy, but because they're genuine. You realize that all those years of not fitting weren't preparation for learning how to adapt. They were preparation for recognizing where you truly belong, for knowing the difference between forcing yourself into the wrong spaces and moving naturally into the right ones. This shift from trying to fit expectations to honoring your true design changed you deeply. You moved from resistance to acceptance, from seeing difference as a flaw to recognizing it as intention, from treating your uniqueness as a problem to understanding it as purpose. You stopped seeking validation from those who couldn't see you clearly, stopped explaining yourself to those who weren't listening, stopped defending your nature to those who never understood it. You became selective about who received your time, who had access to your energy, who was allowed into your space. Not out of exclusion, but out of care. Care for your nature, your design, your truth. You had spent too long allowing people who didn't understand your structure to try shaping it. That phase ended. Your design was no longer open for debate. Your nature was no longer available for revision. You grew confident in your difference. Not arrogant, grounded. You understood who you are. You knew what you were built for and what you were not. That clarity gave you steadiness. It brought assurance. It created calm. You were no longer uncertain, no longer second-guessing, no longer searching for confirmation. You knew. Your different construction isn't only about you. It's a contribution to the world, to the people who need what only your design can offer, to the purposes that require your specific capacity. You weren't built differently by chance. You were built differently because something different was needed. Your depth allows you to navigate situations surface thinking cannot. Your intensity allows you to create impact moderate approaches never reach. Your awareness allows you to access understanding others don't. The very traits that made you incompatible with their expectations are the traits that make you valuable beyond comparison. The world already has enough people who fit familiar patterns, enough who operate comfortably within conventional limits. What the world needs are those who don't fit, those who move beyond existing boundaries, those who embody possibilities not yet defined, those who expand what can exist. You accepted that your presence was never meant to fit their expectations. And that acceptance brought clarity, strength, freedom. You stopped adjusting, stopped resisting, stopped reshaping yourself. You simply existed as you are, and that was sufficient. You now understand that you weren't built to make others comfortable. You weren't designed to resolve their confusion. You weren't constructed to meet their standards. You were built for your purpose, shaped for your path, created for your contribution. That difference may unsettle others. It may challenge them. It may confuse them. And that's fine, because you're not here for their response. You're here for your truth. Your difference is your strength. Your inability to fit their structures is your freedom. You're not flawed. You're not defective. You're not incorrect. You're simply built differently. And different is exactly what you were meant to be.